Harold Monroe's gnarled fingers trembled slightly as he gripped his worn leather wallet. At 91, even simple tasks required concentration. The wallet opened to reveal a faded military ID card, issued 7 decades earlier when he was a young man, facing the horrors of Normandy Beach. Today, the bustling JFK airport felt almost as disorienting as those distant shores had been. He was a man of history, but in the present, his world seemed to move faster than he could keep up. "Grandpa, are you sure you'll be okay waiting?" asked Michael, his grandson, concern evident in his voice. Michael stood tall, freshly pressed in civilian clothes, just hours away from boarding a flight to basic training. "Been standing longer than you've been alive, son," Harold replied with a smile that briefly smoothed the deep creases around his eyes. "You go make your calls. I'll find somewhere to rest these old bones." It had been 5 years since Eleanor, his wife of 63 years, had passed. Now, Harold lived alone in a small apartment in Queens, his days marked by the medications he took and the weekly visits from family. But today was different. Today, despite the 3-hour wait before boarding, Harold had insisted on coming to see Michael off. The terminal's hard plastic chairs promised little comfort for his arthritic hips, but he'd endure. Harold's eyes settled on the glass doors of the premium lounge, where plush seating and quiet spaces beckoned. He approached slowly, each step deliberate against the polished floor. "Excuse me," he said softly to the young receptionist behind the counter. The name tag read Greg. "I don't have a business class ticket, but I'm seeing my grandson off to the Marines. I served myself back in '44. Harold slid his veteran's card forward. "I was hoping I might sit inside for a bit." Greg, perhaps 30, barely glanced at the ID before pushing it back across the counter, his eyes still fixed on the computer screen. "This lounge is for premium ticket holders and club members only," he stated flatly. "We're not a retirement home. If you don't have a VIP ticket, please step aside for customers who do." A businessman in line behind Harold spoke up. "Come on, he's a veteran. Surely you can make an exception for someone who served." Greg's expression hardened. "Sir, if you have a problem with our policy, you're welcome to wait outside as well. There are plenty of seats in the terminal." The businessman fell silent, suddenly fascinated by his phone screen. Harold carefully returned his ID to his wallet. No argument, no protest. He simply nodded, a slight movement almost imperceptible to those not watching closely. "Thank you for your time," he murmured, turning away from the counter. Airport security cameras captured what happened next. An elderly man in a faded blue jacket, moving with painful slowness, made his way to a stone bench outside the terminal entrance. Harold settled himself carefully, removed a small thermos from his carry bag, and with slightly trembling hands, poured himself a cup of water. His face revealed nothing, no anger, no disappointment, just the quiet dignity of a man who had seen far worse than momentary unkindness. Not everyone needs to be celebrated, but no one deserves to be humiliated for their past service. What would you do if you saw a hero treated like they were invisible? Marta Sanchez had been scrubbing airport floors for 17 years. She knew every corner of JFK's Terminal 4 and could tell the difference between tourists, business people, and those who had seen far too much of the world to be impressed by an airport's grandeur. The elderly man sitting alone caught her attention immediately. Something in his posture, straight-backed despite obvious discomfort, reminded her of her father, who had served in Vietnam and never spoke of it. While emptying a nearby trash bin, she noticed the man's hands. They were workers' hands, marked by age but still strong, one bearing a faded tattoo partially obscured by a sleeve, the insignia of the 1st Infantry Division. "Sir, would you like a fresh cup?" Marta asked, gesturing to his nearly empty thermos. Harold looked up, surprised by the kindness. "That's very thoughtful, but I'm fine. I crossed the English Channel in February 1944. Much colder than today. My father served too," she said, smiling. "May I ask your name?" "Monroe. Harold Monroe," he replied, a ghost of a smile crossing his weathered face. "And please don't make a fuss. Just don't let a grandson know about this. He's shipping out today. Proud moment for him." Unbeknownst to either of them, Alexa Richards, a doctoral student waiting for her flight to Chicago, had witnessed the entire exchange at the lounge. Disturbed by what she had seen, she had discreetly recorded the incident on her phone. Within minutes, she uploaded the video to her social media accounts with the caption, "My grandfather told me stories about men like him. I never thought I'd see them treated this way. Veterans Day every day. Disrespect." The video spread like wildfire. Within 2 hours, it had garnered over 100,000 views, sparking heated debates across platforms. "That receptionist should be fired immediately," one comment read. "What happened to respecting our veterans?" another asked. "It's just policy. The old man doesn't get special treatment just because he served decades ago." Others were more personal. "My father is a World War II vet. This breaks my heart." The airline's social media team scrambled to address the growing controversy. The lounge manager was summoned from his office, visibly displeased at being pulled away from quarterly reports. After reviewing the security footage, he instructed Greg to report to Human Resources, but stopped short of issuing a public apology, calling it an internal service discrepancy that would be addressed appropriately. Greg remained defiant in the HR office. "I was just following protocol." But the damage had already been done. The humdrum of everyday life can mask the extraordinary stories of those who lived through them. But every so often, the past forces its way into the present, demanding attention, respect, and the acknowledgement it's long been denied. In a terminal at JFK Airport, the unassuming figure of Harold Monroe, an elderly man with a weathered face, unwittingly set in motion a wave of recognition that would echo through generations. It began with a simple video, forwarded through the National Veteran Service Alliance, eventually landing on the desk of Colonel David Ashford, a distinguished officer in the Marine Corps Reserve who had just returned from his 5th overseas deployment. When Ashford paused the video and zoomed in on Monroe's face, recognition hit him like a bolt of lightning. Despite the years, despite the age, he knew that face unmistakable, unforgettable. Harold Monroe. Ashford's mind flashed back to 1977, a Cold War in full swing, when, as a young Marine lieutenant, he had found himself stranded in a restricted zone during a training exercise gone wrong in Berlin. A diplomatic incident was imminent, but there, in the midst of it all, stood Monroe, a calm and steady military attaché who negotiated his release with East German authorities, saving not only his career, but his life. "He saved my life," Ashford whispered, remembering the quiet dignity with which Monroe had risked his own career for a stranger. Without hesitation, Ashford reached for his phone, dialing a number few civilians would recognize. "This is Colonel Ashford," he said, his voice firm with purpose. "I need the ceremonial detail, full dress blues, and the airport director at JFK. We have a debt of honor to repay." As he checked his watch, he knew they had little time. A debt that had remained unspoken for decades was finally ready to be repaid. Meanwhile, Harold Monroe, oblivious to the unfolding plans, had already entered the terminal, his joints stiff from the cold. He was alone, seated on a bench near Gate 17. Michael, his grandson, had walked away to grab a bite before his flight, leaving Harold in a sea of indifferent strangers. An elderly man who had survived the bloody hedgerows of France, the freezing winters of '44, and the long, drawn-out war in Korea, could now survive the isolation of an airport terminal. But the air around him was about to shift. Outside, the sound of military vehicles approaching the perimeter sent ripples of curiosity through the crowded parking lot. 3 Humvees and 2 official Marine Corps transport vehicles lined up, their presence unmistakable. This was no drill, no routine check. This was something different, something important. As the convoy came to a halt, Colonel Ashford, in his full dress blue uniform, emerged from the lead vehicle. Behind him stood 24 Marines, their faces stoic and unwavering, their movements precise. The crowd at the terminal seemed to sense something significant was unfolding. Travelers paused, conversations fell silent, and eyes began to follow the formation of Marines, making their way through the terminal. The noise of the busy airport softened as Ashford led his Marines in 2 perfect columns toward the gate where Harold sat, unaware of the spectacle headed his way. The group moved with the kind of precision reserved for ceremonial events. It was as if the very air around them held its breath in anticipation. As Ashford's gaze swept across the terminal, he spotted Harold, sitting on the bench, his faded blue jacket marking him as a man of history. The colonel moved toward him, every step measured, deliberate. "Mr. Monroe," Ashford's voice rang out, carrying across the quiet space. "It's been an honor, sir. 46 years late, but we're here to thank you properly." Harold, taken by surprise, slowly looked up, confusion turning to recognition. He struggled to rise, his knees too stiff to comply, but Ashford was there, stepping forward and gently placing a hand on his shoulder. "No, sir," Ashford said softly. "You've stood long enough for this country." In perfect unison, the 24 Marines snapped to attention, saluting the man who had once saved their brother's life. The sound of their polished boots striking the terminal floor echoed, drawing gasps of astonishment from the surrounding crowd. A businessman blinked away tears. A mother explained to her son what they were witnessing, a silent tribute to a hero. Colonel Ashford, standing tall and proud, withdrew an envelope sealed with the Pentagon's official mark. Inside was a first-class airline ticket, but it wasn't just any ticket. It was an honorary lifetime pass, giving Harold Monroe access to military VIP lounges across the country. Ashford extended the offer with the reverence due to a man who had given so much. "Mr. Monroe," he said, "the United States Marine Corps would be honored if you would accept this token of our appreciation." Harold glanced at the ticket, then slowly shook his head. "That's very kind, Colonel," he said, "but unnecessary. I'll sit in regular seating like everyone else." The slight smile that touched his lips spoke volumes. "But thank you for remembering an old man." Ashford's voice carried again, louder now, for all to hear. "This gentleman before you is Harold Monroe. In 1944, he landed at Normandy with the first wave. He survived when thousands didn't. He continued serving his country through Korea and into the Cold War. And in 1977, he saved the lives of several Marines, including mine." The terminal, once filled with the murmur of travelers, now erupted in applause. It began quietly, from a distant corner, but it grew, spreading until the entire space reverberated with clapping hands, people recognizing the significance of the man before them. Michael returned to find his grandfather at the center of this unexpected tribute, surrounded by Marines and applauding civilians. He stood frozen, watching in awe as he realized the quiet man who had taught him to fish, to tie his shoes, and to live with integrity was no ordinary man. He had just been given something few others had, the recognition he so rightfully deserved. Colonel Ashford. Seeing Michael, gestured him forward. "You must be the grandson," he said with a smile. "You're about to join a brotherhood that spans generations from this man to you and beyond. Never forget that." As the applause began to die down, Harold Monroe took Michael's hand in his. "I never told you much about my service," he said, his voice quiet but steady, "because I didn't think it mattered anymore. Maybe I was wrong about that." For the first time, Michael understood. His grandfather's quiet dignity, the sacrifices he had made, had never been about seeking recognition. But that recognition, when it came, would make all the difference. "Respect," Harold said softly, "is never too late to give." And so, Harold Monroe's life returned to its quiet rhythm in the days that followed, watering plants, reading newspapers, walking to the corner deli. Yet something had changed. His country had finally remembered him, and with that acknowledgement, an old man's silent service had been repaid in full. As for Michael, he left for basic training with a new understanding of the legacy he carried, a legacy of honor that would live on in him, in his children, and in the generations that would follow. In their final moments together at the airport, Harold had only one thing to say: "Be proud of your choice to serve. The rest is just noise." The incident that followed sent ripples far beyond that single afternoon. Greg, the lounge receptionist, found himself reassigned to baggage services after a formal review. He penned a personal letter of apology to Harold's home address, but it sat unopened on the kitchen counter for several days. Eventually, Harold read it, nodded once, and filed it away without a word. Yet something more significant emerged from the moment. The state governor, ever alert to a politically valuable opportunity, signed the Veterans Access Act into law 3 weeks later. This legislation mandated that all publicly operated airports in the state designate at least 5 premium seating spaces exclusively for veterans, regardless of ticket class. It wasn't long before similar bills appeared across 12 other states. The incident, which had seemed so small, sparked a wave of change, one seat at a time. A headline in a major newspaper's editorial section read, "One seat awakens a system," with an article that noted, "Sometimes the most significant changes begin with the smallest indignities, recognized and corrected." Colonel Ashford, who had been deeply moved by Harold's quiet strength, kept in touch with him. During one visit, he brought along 6 young Marines who had requested to meet the man whose story had become a legend among certain military circles. A photographer captured the moment. Harold, small but straight-backed, seated in the center of a semicircle of young Marines, their service uniforms crisp. The old man held a coffee cup, a slight smile on his weathered face as he shared stories that few history books had recorded. The young men leaned in, captivated, their expressions a mix of respect and awe. The photo circulated online with a simple caption from one of the Marines. He waited decades for a seat. Today, we stood for him. The image quickly became an emblem for a new generation of service members, a reminder that the uniforms they wore connected them to an unbroken line of sacrifice, stretching back through decades. Despite the surge of public attention, Harold remained largely unchanged. When a neighbor asked if all the newfound recognition had been overwhelming, he simply shrugged and replied, "I've been noticed before, and I've been invisible before. Neither one defines you. It's what you do when no one's watching that matters." 6 months later, when Michael completed basic training, Harold attended the graduation ceremony. Without fanfare or announcement, he was quietly escorted to a front row seat, a silent gesture of respect. The commanding officer nodded as he passed, one guardian of freedom acknowledging another across generations. Harold's story, more than the medals or titles he could claim, was defined by the quiet acts of honor that transcended public recognition. Gratitude, Harold knew, isn't found in loud ceremonies, but in small, silent acknowledgments that pass between those who understand. One day, a neighbor, moved by the story, shared it with a simple line. When I saw that photo of Monroe surrounded by Marines, I couldn't help but think of my dad. He wasn't famous. He never asked for thanks. But once a kid offered him a seat on the bus, and he talked about it for days. That's what respect feels like. When you think the world forgot you, that small moment makes all the difference. Maybe that's why this story hits so hard. Harold's story is a reminder that if someone you know once stood for something, you should share that story with them so they know we still remember. It had all begun with a small, seemingly insignificant incident. A receptionist's cold dismissal. "No business class ticket? Get out of here. We don't serve old soldiers." The elderly man, dignified despite the sting, bowed his head, took back his ticket, and silently turned away. But 10 minutes later, a military convoy appeared outside the terminal. Marines stepped out, not carrying luggage, but walking straight into the waiting area. What made an entire military unit intervene over something as simple as an airport lounge seat? The answer lay not in the seat itself, but in the principle that those who have given so much deserve to be seen, respected, and never forgotten.